abortion. We vote for childbirth. We are addicted to thought.
Indaba, where knowledge grows, is hosted by the Emancipation Support Committee. Be listening on Talk City 91.1 FM this Wednesday at 8 p.m.
Well, yes, indeed, it is Wednesday, and this is Talk City 91.1 FM as we continue to keep you informed, keep you entertained as we get ready to join our team for tonight's Indaba program. And of course, you could get a viewpoint, a report on the first Ideas Africa Network Conference, Rethinking Regional Integration in Africa. And of course, we will have the Africa report, which is kind of like a look back at 2025, a review of 2025. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Shabaka Kambon, Dr. Fergus, and of course, Renee Francois. Good evening to one and all. Hope you guys are hearing me loud and clear. Very good evening to you, Dr. Fergus.
Good evening, my brother Ruskin. We are hearing you loud and clear. Good evening to the listeners on Talk City, 91.1 FM, and of course to our listeners and viewers on social media. Special greetings, of course, always go to Talk City listeners. And we continue to be grateful to the station's management for keeping Indaba on the air. Since 2011, I believe, I'm subject to correction, Renee, but I think it's since 2011 we have been on the air at Talk City. So they also continue to promote the show weekly, sometimes daily. So we are grateful to 91.1 FM. This evening we have a packed program for you as usual. We are going to be looking at the year in review, not so much a review of 2025. I think there was a sort of misconception, my fault. But I'm actually reviewing the Africa reports for 2025. And I thought I could have done all of those in one session, but I could not. It was too much. So I'm going to do a two-part presentation. The next week I would do part 2. So we are reviewing the Africa reports. And then we have a report on the first Ideas Africa Network Conference, Rethinking Regional Integration in Africa. The acronym is IDEAS, IDEAS. And we have as one of our guests, none other than our producer, the CEO and chair of the Emancipation Support Committee. He was on site in Senegal and just back a few minutes ago, back home. He would be joining us along with Atieno and Ndomo, who was a recent guest on Indaba to promote that particular conference. She's going to join us again from the motherland. We also have Steve Cupid Theodore, who was at the conference. I'm not sure where he is now, but he might still be in Senegal. But he is going to be with us this evening. I believe Steve has a track record on fighting for women's rights. So we are going to welcome our guests again soon. And we have our super guest, David Abudallah. Brother David Abudallah would be here to talk to us about the part 2 of Vigil for Peace, which would be on Sunday the 7th. And the theme this time, Nobody Wins a War. And we can't have any better guest than David Abudallah and our super sister, Abeo Jackson, would be with us as well. I'm Claudius Fergus, and my co-host this evening, Shabaka, is not going to be with us this evening. My co-host this evening is Renee. Good evening. Welcome, Renee.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Fergus. Good evening, Ruskin, and to all our viewers on Facebook, YouTube, and 91.1 FM. Thank you all for joining us. You're right, Dr. Fergus. The radio program with TTT came about after, or during, I should say, the first year for people of African descent. That was one of the projects or activities that ESCTT was able to negotiate and achieve. And since then, the radio program has been going strong. And well, as you've seen, within over the last 2 years, this might be our second year, we've transitioned to online to capture a larger audience. So hopefully things will continue to grow in 2026.
Right, indeed. So we are going to take the Africa report first. As I said, it's a review of the Africa report. So my original intention was simply to produce clips of that report and just make a little comment, a one sentence comment here and there. I thought that would have been easy picking. Actually, it was not like that. It could not have been like that. So it really took as much time as producing an original Africa report. But here we go, and we, of course, will take your comments and feedback on the number that you see at the bottom of the screen. There's also a WhatsApp number that you can send a voice note on for us. And of course, we always appreciate if you can share the video and give us a like, right? Give us a like. So over to you, Renee, to bring up the Africa report.
Okay.
This week's edition of the Africa Report will take the form of a review of the year based on previously aired Africa reports. Part 2 will follow next week. The first Africa report for 2025 coincided with the formal exit of the AES, the Association of Sahelian States, and its status as a new regional bloc.
These are not coup d'etats. These are revolutions.
ECOWAS, however, was still hoping for a retraction and gave the AES leaders 6 more months before ratifying their exit. That report also revealed that several ECOWAS leaders were not only mending fences with the AES, but were also inspired to act more decisively against the neo-colonizing of the region. To summarize some developments since that report, Ivory Coast kept its ultimatum and took control of the French base near the capital, Abidjan, in mid-February. In July, Senegal took control of the French military base, ending 60 years of French military presence since independence. Meanwhile, Ghana is saddled with American troops that use an exclusive section of Kotoka Airport as a military base under a SOFA agreement, like that which facilitate American soldiers now operating in Trinidad and Tobago. As of this week, American spy drones have been launched from Kotoka, Ghana, to northern Nigeria to do surveillance and even launch strikes on alleged terrorist camps. The public is yet to be informed of the secret agreement between the United States and Nigeria's government. The most surprising AES development was the official visit by Nigeria's defense minister to Niger Republic 2 weeks ago. It is possible that the visit was a strategic move to preempt America's threat of blazing guns against Nigeria. Coincidentally, that minister has resigned a couple days ago. In February, the Africa Report celebrated the bicentenary of the founding of Lesotho by King Moshoeshoe I. We then looked at the perennial crisis of insecurity in Africa and its link to Africa's solid mineral resource-rich regions. The report explained how the colonial creation and definition of ethnicity in Eastern Africa feeds the crisis of insecurity in the DRC, mainly between the two groups that appropriated the colonial identity of Tutsi and Hutu. The current crisis in Eastern DRC is fed by two major elements. The first is a combination of local and regional factors and takes the form of an ethnic struggle for political hegemony between Tutsi and Hutu. The second factor is a combination of regional and international stakeholders, taking the form of a scramble for cheap minerals, especially the rare earths needed for the technologies of the Fifth Industrial Revolution. The DRC is Africa's second largest country and arguably its most endowed in terms of natural resources, which are most highly concentrated in the eastern provinces. The report showed how the Tutsi-dominated army in the civil war in Rwanda morphed into M23, the main rebel group in the DRC. At the time of the Africa report, the M23 had renewed its attack on government forces, vowing to capture Kinshasa, the capital of the DRC. In the first week of March, the Africa report rolled out part 2 of the DRC crisis, taking time to explain the complex factors that sustained the crisis. At the time of the report, M23 had recaptured the city of Goma, the economic heart of the DRC.
When you take Goma, you hit the very heart of Eastern Congo.
The latest update on that situation played out in Doha, the capital of Qatar, just last week, with M23 signing an agreement with the government of the DRC. In the next Africa report, we explored the meaning of traditional architecture in Africa and concluded the topic in the second week of April with continental examples of blending traditional and modern concepts. In both reports, we celebrated the renowned award-winning Burkinabe architect, Francis Kéré, who specializes in natural materials on the continent and abroad. The latest on this topic was the grand opening last month of the Museum of West African Art in Edo State in southwestern Nigeria. The principal architect was none other than Francis Kéré, who utilized red rammed earth walls, a feature of West African architecture dating back to the 9th century. The building is described as emblematic of the urgency for restitution of Africa's stolen arts. The founding director of Lagos Photo Festival, Asu Nwamogu, said the aim of restitution is, quote-unquote, a reversal of epistemicide. He explained that epistemicide refers to the destruction of entire knowledge systems embodied in pillaged artifacts. Indeed, one exhibition last month was entitled Restitution in Motion, an exhibition of Benin bronzes returned from around the world. In the first edition for the month of April, the Africa report addressed the impact of Donald Trump's tariff pandemic on Africa. This was the picture on the day of the report. AGOA, AGOA, is the African Growth and Opportunity Act that allowed signatory African states to sell commodities duty-free in the United States market. America also enjoyed spectacular benefits under the act. But Trump's new tariffs contemptuously violate this treaty. He imposed tariffs of 10% on 9 countries, which kicked in on the 5th of April, and 30% and more on other countries, which kick in today, the 9th of April, and some tomorrow, the 10th of April. Some African countries face tariffs of 30%, South Africa 31%, but also South Africa faces a special 25% on all South African-made vehicles entering the United States market. Other countries face much higher tariffs, such as Madagascar with 47% and Lesotho with 50%, which is guaranteed to send the economy into a tailspin. The tariff war is ongoing. The first edition of the Africa Report for May reviewed the first global solidarity protests in defense of President Ibrahim Traoré, who was directly threatened by the commander of the United States Africa Command, General Michael Langley, in the United States Congress. The report reflected on the practice of imperialists co-opting black agents to destabilize, overthrow, imprison, and assassinate progressive and revolutionary black leaders. The first edition of the Africa Report for the month of June brought highlights of the Global Africa Solidarity sequel that took place on African Liberation Day, the 25th of May.
I wouldn't say Africa uprising. Why? Because African youth are taking it by force. We are saying we are tired and we want them to get their hands off our Captain Ibrahim Traore.
This is not the time for cowards who die times without number. Because if you are a coward today, your children and children's children will pay the price of our cowardice. We must speak out and bear the consequences.
We also highlighted the immediate reaction of Africa in convening a conference of 37 African military chiefs in Kenya 3 days after the protests. The AES immediately retaliated with their own show of force. Protesters did not celebrate a salient victory in the firing of General Langley for failing to carry out the purge of Sahelian leaders. Or was it karma? The Second Africa Report of May looked at the geopolitics in the Western Sahara and its implication for the landlocked Association of Sahelian States. The report looked at the negotiation between Morocco and Mali for an outlet to the Atlantic Ocean. We commented on the longer history of relations between Morocco and the Western Sahel, from the trans-Saharan trade and the Moroccan invasion of 1591 and 1593 that caused the collapse of the Songhai Empire. That invasion was an alliance between Morocco and England, with England providing the heavy guns and cannons and over half of the invading troops. The second edition of the Africa Report for June honored Frantz Fanon as a complement to the launch of the annual Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series. Fanon was reviewed in the context of the Algerian Revolution, in which he participated and which inspired his best-known work, The Wretched of the Earth. The report introduced the idea that French colonialism in Algeria was the embryo of the pernicious system of apartheid in Africa.
I am talking about those who, as I write this, are digging the harbour of Abidjan by hand. I am talking about millions of men torn from their gods, their land, their habits, their life, from the dance, from wisdom.
That's a readout of a translation by Joan Pinkham from Aimé Césaire's work, Discourse on Colonialism. Fanon used the quote to begin his introduction, The Algerian War of Independence. It was the most brutal independence war fought on African soil. France deployed over 1.5 million soldiers, aided by 150,000 Muslim Algerians. Yet France refused to call it a war. By so doing, the Algerian combatants remained outside international law and did not qualify as victims or protected against the war crimes committed against them. We see the same dynamics at play in the Caribbean today. Yes, so there you have it, the Africa Report. For me, it's the first time doing this kind of review. And, you know, I have to confess it was fascinating, even listening to my own past reports. I was fascinating. It was almost nostalgic in some instances, but exhilarating in other instances. And I think I would want to say that the reports remain relevant, even to today. Even the earliest ones still remain relevant, and that's why I try to connect with the further developments out of some of those reports. And I would recommend that listeners go back and listen to some of them, watch them, right? And I'm sure you would not regret at all whatsoever. As usual, Renee, you are invited to have a brief comment before we move on. And our guests, if they were listening, of course, you're welcome to give a brief comment.
Yeah, I just think it was a excellent summary of the things that you were able to cover for 2025. I think we continue to look forward to your Africa reports. Just kind of zeroing in on what's happening on the continent and just providing really concise information, tidbits for us to swallow, contemplate, digest. So it's very much appreciative.
Thank you. And of course, it's time we isolate the reports to be able to upload them separately. I thought even I have a YouTube account that I don't use, so maybe I might be doing that myself, to put them up on my own YouTube account. Yes, so any of our guests, I think a brief comment. We do have to move on, but of course, it might be impudent of me not to ask for a brief comment from anyone who might want to make a comment. Africa is important to all of us, of course.
Yeah, Dr. Fergus, I thought the report, what I admire and like about the reports that you do is that they help us to understand a lot of the background to the current issues that continue to impact the continent, So the historical perspective in which you put most of those issues and, bringing together the different perspectives, I think are very important to help us in understanding the current issues that are taking place on the continent, which of course is what our discussion is going to be about, that integration of the continent and all of these issues. I think one of those that you would have raised in the report was pertinent and would have featured in the discussions that took place at the conference, so it's all very timely and all well connected.
Yes, so
may I say quickly just how I'm impressed by the breadth of what you cover, but also just the timeliness. So, in a little while, you've talked about what's going on in the DRC. You've mentioned the Sahelian states, the issue of military bases on the continent. You've touched on the return of artifacts, so the whole reparations agenda. And it's so broad, but also very timely in the sense of the things that are current and that are of now. I am myself interested in looking back at this material and information and just seeing how, with our own networks, perhaps we help spread the information and the analysis further. So really, really spot on in terms of the pulse of what's current and what the discussions are, what the issues the continent is dealing with in the moment.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, if I may also add, if we have time. Yeah?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes, Dr. Fergus, I want to commend you as well. I think when you look at the report, what also comes to stark view is the absence of any kind of comprehensive coverage of Africa and African affairs. This seems to be one of the only places where you can get any kind of in-depth coverage or even just view of what is happening in Africa. And if you compare it to what the mainstream media shows, you get a completely warped and minuscule idea of the immense depth and breadth of the continent. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. So now we move on to the next segment of the program, and that is the recent conference that our three guests would have attended in Senegal. We did promote the conference on this station. I did not get a bio background, but we did have Atieno on the last program. We did not have Brother Theodore. So, Brother Theodore, we'll start with you. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and so that we will have some sense of everybody who is on the program.
Certainly, no problem. And thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation to have me on. So for the last few years, I have been working as a researcher in law and climate finance and economics, particularly looking at the impact of climate finance on the ways in which it might be reproducing and extending relations of inequality and historical exploitation. I came to be part of this. I'm speaking to you tonight from Dakar, Senegal, where I've stayed a bit after the conference, and was fortunate to be a part of this following the Ideas Conference held at the University of the West Indies last month. I think it was November or October. So that, that allowed me to be a part of this, I think, incredible and quite historic conference, which at first, appeared to be a meeting of developmental economists and heterodox economists from around the world. But who was to expect that it would include such luminaries such as Dr. Julius Garvey, Samia Nkrumah, the daughter of Kwame Nkrumah, the childhood friend of Thomas Sankara, the son of Cheikh Anta Diop, the Senegalese historian, philosopher, and physicist. So what turned out to be much more than your typical economics conference. And I'm sure our other guests will tell you more about that as well. But for me, it has been quite profound, and I look forward to extending my research, looking at the role of extraction and exploitation in Africa, and whether that is going to be continued or interrupted under conditions of climate apartheid. So that's where I'm coming from.
Okay, so let's go on. Thank you. Let's go on to one of the organizers of the conference, Sister Atieno. Bring us up to speed with what the conference was all about and how successful you think it was, what kind of impact there was, who were the attendees, where did they come from, and how impactful do you think this conference is for changing the dynamics in terms of rethinking regional integration in West Africa, because that's part of the problem we are confronting now, the reintegrating of the ECOWAS region, in addition to, of course, the African Union. So over to you, Sister Atieno.
Thank you very much. And it's just very interesting listening to Theodore, because as people who put this together, it's helpful to hear the perspective of somebody else who came into it after it happened. So I'm really keen to hear also from Zakiya. But just quickly, you touched on the title. The theme was Rethinking Integration. And I think for me, one of the key takeaways was a kind of really poignant point that was made by Horace Campbell. You probably know him. He's a really powerful thinker, and he was with us the entire time. And he challenged us. I think for me, what I took away was his distinction, where he talked of, as opposed to thinking in terms of regional integration, we should be talking about African unity. And so the context for which the conversation happened was also about revisiting the vision for Africa unity that was propagated by, founders, the likes of Kwame Nkrumah. If you think about those early thinkers and those early fighters for Pan-Africanism, they were very clear in their minds about the unity of the continent, of the peoples. And so a big critique of the conversations is about the extent to which the current model of regional integration as being practiced, the way in which it is limiting. And why is it limiting? Because it's very much modeled around neoliberal thinking. So in many ways, regional integration is being equated with trade. And that's a very limiting conceptualization, because at the heart of integration is about how do you bring together the peoples. I was joking about my journey to Dakar. So I went to Dakar from Accra, Ghana. The day I was traveling, I had to leave home early because there's no direct flight connection between Dakar and Accra, a journey that should take no more than 3 hours. I left the house in Accra early morning to try and catch a morning flight. I ended up getting into my room in Dakar after 8 p.m. in the night. Somebody who would have been leaving France to go to Dakar would easily be on a direct flight that doesn't take more than 5.5 hours, and they will get there long before me. So how would you be thinking about connecting the continent when even just basic movement from point A to B in the same sub-region is still very difficult? That's if you can afford a ticket. you still don't have a direct flight connection. So I have to route my journey via Lome, Togo. If I'm coming from Nigeria, it's the same story. If I'm coming from Liberia, it's even longer because you come from Liberia, you come into Ghana, Lome, Dakar. I make the point to just graphically show how difficult basic movement is. Yet this is one of the pillars of integration. How can you bring a people together if they cannot even just freely move because of hurdles such as this? So these are some of the conversations that we had. The mix of participants was really interesting. On each day, we had no less than 100 people. As with ideas meetings, we try to strengthen global South connections. So we have representation from Asia. We have on the African continent, perhaps the most representation because it was happening in Dakar. But we also had representation from Latin America. And for us, most exciting this time, from the Caribbean, which we are really wanting to have greater connections. So obviously Theodore, Madame Zakiya, the likes of Horace Campbell, and so on, was really good to start to have a presence from Latin America. In terms of discussions, I also must emphasize that we're very keen on involving young people. So a precursor to this conference, I think I mentioned it in the promo, was 3 days of a young scholars workshop, which happened at the Museum of Black Civilizations in Dakar. Even the venue of that whole meeting for me was very profound. But it was that over 3 days, we had 100 young scholars, many of them people who have finished undergrad studies and are doing their master's programs and beyond. People who are interested in pursuing PhD studies. Over 3 days, were being taught by scholars from, again, across the global South. It was such an interesting mix. If you go to our website, and I'll put this on the chart, one can follow, and all of this was being live streamed, so you can get a flavor of the sort of teaching, the sort of discussions that happen. So we are energized by the idea that younger scholars are being mentored by some of our senior scholars and experts, and that we hope that we are building and we're training a cadre of younger thinkers who think about economics differently, because at the heart of our economics is the heart of the problem. There's a lot of dominance of neoliberal economic thinking, and we are hoping that ideas think differently in a heterodox manner, and that they start to learn that economics can be practiced and taught differently. I may stop there because there's so much I could say about the discussions we had. There was an outcome statement that touched on some of the issues from your Africa report. I know there was a very bold statement made about we need to have an end to military bases on the African continent. The discussions touched on how we need to leverage our wealth, our natural resource wealth, for it to serve our people. How do we make sure that perhaps some of what we're seeing emerging from the Sahelian states in terms of reclaiming and using our wealth for our own people's, prosperity becomes a reality, not something that we keep talking about and it's not happening in reality. So I'm curious to just pause here, and perhaps the opportunity goes to Theodore and Madame Zakiya from their own experience, how they felt. I would rather hear them judge how useful they think this was, and we can keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for having me.
Renee, you can jump in.
This is either for Ms. Zakiya or Mr. Theodore. Ms. Ndomo had spoken about having Caribbean representation. How do you figure the Caribbean region being a part of that reintegration or reunification that persons are aiming for on the continent? What role do you see the Caribbean playing in a scenario or that kind of progression?
Yes, so Ren, actually that was one of my key presentations at the comments at the conference. The significance of the role of the diaspora in all of the liberation movements of the continent, over the years, from the big time of independence movements, and the fact that we had descendants of some of those persons there in the person of the son of Marcus Garvey, who is also still very respected. He was there. And the daughter of, as Steve mentioned, the daughter of Kwame Nkrumah was also there, who spoke quite a bit of his relationship with George Padmore. and that it went beyond just not, I mean, it met as colleagues and students in England, but that it grew into, a very close, almost familial kind of relationship. So I thought that was very, very important, and I really want to thank Ideas for including us in this conversation, because I always think that the Caribbean brings a slightly different perspective to the discussions, and my contribution also sought to position the challenges that we are having on the continent as part of the decolonization and reparations movement, because that's not very popular in the conversation yet. Yes, even though the African Union has declared, which we think is extremely important, the decade for reparations. So I sort of urge the participants to take note of that and use it to sort of repair some of the same structures, some of the same condition of mind, some of the same way in which we do business, all of those things that needs to be repaired, because those are the things that are inhibiting us from that integration. That colonial mindset, the way that we govern, the way that we trade, the way that we educate our children. So therefore it is having this understanding of integration. I also gave the example of, the fact that pre-colonial days, trade within the continent was integrated because people traded from different parts of the continent and they had their own way. It was based, yes, on a barter system, but people asked for what they needed, and people provided, you understand, each other with what was required, and therefore that just stimulated integration because everybody did not have the same items, and therefore thinking of trade perhaps along those lines might really help to bring integration. So I really think it is a very important conversation. I would like to hear, as I have discussed with Ideas on a one-on-one, that we focus a lot, we put all of these issues within the context of decolonization and reparations, so that one, we begin to educate, because that was what another call was made, to make our people understand the role of Pan-Africanism, what Pan-Africanism is all about, the importance of the impact of colonization on the continent still. And, as Horace, I was very pleased to hear Horace. So we keep talking about how much Africa owes to people, Africa's debt. What we need to be talking is about reparations for Africa. Because if we start to see it from that perspective, then we realize we don't owe anybody anything. We are the ones who are owed. So that is what my overview on it. I really would like us to put a lot of those discussions that are taking place on the continent with respect to integration within the context of decolonization and reparations. Yeah.
I just have one follow-up question. I understand that this conference was particularly involved civil society, but was there any representation or participation from the African Union, seeing that they engage at the level of the government, but they also have a body that deals with civil society? Was there anyone present there?
Atieno?
That's for me. So I should have, so before I come to the African Union, I should emphasize that we got a lot of support from the government of Senegal, who was the host. So as Madam Zakiya and Steve know, the closing was done by the Minister for Justice of Senegal, who's a very powerful woman, who's an economist, who's a very strong alternative thinker. So we were very energized by that, but that we got a lot of support from the government of Senegal for the meeting. Unfortunately, we did not have any high-level representation from the African Union. I couldn't quite say why this is the case, but this should have been an obvious, group to include. So I'll just say that for future reference, I think greater connection with the African Union is something that I think we should take up. But there was government representation for the different countries, not only in Senegal. We had officials from other countries who were present. Maybe not the officialdom of the African Union, but in terms of government agencies and different individuals who represented different parts of governments were present. I hope that answers your question.
And
yes,
if I might, Renee, well, with respect to civil society in particular, I also want to point out that there was very strong representation from youth, in particular the Kenyan youth activist Wanjiru Wanjiru, who I think represents a extremely exciting social movement, especially among youth in Kenya, which is really redefining the role of Kenyan youth and their vision of participation, constructive participation, where basically, as we talk about, say, the representation of the African Union, we also have to go back to Horace Campbell's focus on people-centered alternatives and development. And so, there was this very clear double character of the conference as well, because on the one hand, while there were many discussions about, as Atieno mentioned, trade and infrastructure, there was also this acknowledgement that the peoples of Africa are already integrated and have been integrated for so long with respect to their everyday living conditions, the way they migrate among borders, the way they keep up their historical traditions. As Horace Campbell said it, Pan-Africanism is an ambitious project to rehumanize the world. So in other words, I feel that there was a stress here of Pan-Africanism's role throughout the globe, as an approach, as a critique of racial capitalism, as a critique of white supremacy, that keeps the attention on the unequal relations of global capitalism and racial capitalism in a way that better explains the condition that we are right now, not just in global Africa, but around the world. The return of American hegemony on the issues, using Trump with his AI-focused financialization and his image of American hegemony backed by stablecoin. I mean, there were so many different ways in which we could discuss the economics and the political economy around everything from regionalism to reparations and so on. But in the end, we have to keep in mind and keep a focus on what the people want, what the people need, what the people are demanding. And in effect, I think that was one of the big takeaways for me and several others from the conference. You mentioned, I don't know if I have time to just add one last comment. You mentioned the role of the Caribbean and how it could have, how the Caribbean sort of participated in this conference. And I just want to point out, let's recall, right, the great history of Padmore and Nkrumah and C.L.R. James and Amy Sherwood Garvey and so on in the 1945 Fifth Pan-African Conference. So one of the funny things is that, as I've had conversations with David and others, what explains this almost over-representation of Trinidadians and Trinbagonians in the liberation of Africa? What's that?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
No, and sorry. That's me thinking I'm backstage and talking on the show. Sorry.
No problem.
Yeah, okay. We do have to wrap up this segment in a while. So moving a little bit away from the conference directly and looking forward. Now, I had a lot of things I would have wanted to talk about. PLO Lumumba would have talked about his own problems as a luminary legal expert and the problems that he has had traveling across the continent. You could imagine somebody with no political clout, any ordinary person traveling. But in addition to that, the structural problems, for example, with respect to what he said, 54 different currencies that you have to confront all over the place. But what I want to project is this. Regional integration was the theme or the umbrella framework of the conference. Of course, the
the diaspora is officially the sixth region of Africa. And I don't know to what extent that that would have been central to the discussions. But I want to project what could happen within the next few weeks. Air Peace, the largest carrier in West Africa, would be starting a monthly flights, chartered flights. It would be, I believe, monthly flights from the 21st of December to 2 Caribbean destinations and to 2 West African destinations. So Antigua and Barbados to Lagos and Kotoka in Ghana. Now, this must progress to weekly if it is to attract somebody like me, because if you leave on a monthly flight, you have to come back on the next monthly flight, and that cannot be practical to most people. So could you talk about that a little bit? This is an absolute necessity that has been one of our really big struggles in the Caribbean, direct flights, and also, of course, direct shipping and so on. But let's talk about the flights in terms of practicalizing the sixth region. How important is this, and to what extent can you perhaps influence the governments of the region to support this kind of development so that we would have at least weekly flights between Africa and the Caribbean? And you can give your closing remarks at the same time when you're finished.
So quickly, I mean, this is exciting to hear there's a start. I can only say that from the point of view that the government of Ghana is leading the reparations agenda, and President Mahama is a very forward-looking leader, I think that it is not to speak out of turn to say that we have direct possibilities of influencing the agenda from his office, and that links up with the African Union. So I think that this is a conversation that should be had. The head of ideas, Charles Abugre, who Steve and Madam Zakiya met, is a very passionate individual. He not only is the head of ideas, but he's also sort of like an advisor to the president of Ghana at the moment. And so I know that he has a sort of access and is interested in these issues. So I think this is something that we can certainly put on the agenda of conversation. Why this connection needs to be real. And as I said, and as you've said, it starts with enabling movement and people are able to come in and out. The next thing should be about visas. There should not be like hindrances around visa issues. And so I know that, for instance, access to Ghana with the whole return is something that Ghana has been working very hard to avoid having any barriers to access and movement for peoples from the diaspora, from the Caribbean into Ghana. So I'm happy to sort of make this connection. Charles will see this conversation. I know these are things that he's already thinking about. To the extent that he has access and has these conversations at the highest levels, I think this is something that can be taken up and should be part of the conversation. For me, just to say thanks for the platform. Our website, I'll put the information, Renee, on the chat, is something that you should be able to share with your listeners. And there's a lot of analysis and information on there. The live stream will post a lot of videos with a lot of media coverage. We'll have clips there. And so people can dip in. And even though you're not there in person, you can have a real feel of how the discussions went. I know I haven't done justice to what happened. For us, it was very profound. And I'm happy to have this platform to continue to sort of just give a little flavor and people can have access. And hopefully we continue talking about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Brother Steve?
You're muted, Steve.
Please unmute.
Steve, you're muted.
My apologies. Yes, Dr. Fergus, with respect to your specific question about the need for that infrastructure, I think you're absolutely right. As it is the same as Atieno has spoken about to unite the African continent, as it is for our regional integration efforts and some of the challenges and constraints that we face in the Caribbean. What I want to say generally is that one of the themes that came from several of the presentations at the conference also had to do with monetary sovereignty and the ability of governments to set their own agendas and their own priorities based on some of the economic strategies that would have been used prior to the, to this neoliberal sort of hegemony over and the closing of the political and economic space for our countries. I think one of the important points that was made is that, for example, credit policy, which really allowed governments to set their economic agendas and then not wait on taxes to fund them, but actually provide credit to those institutions that the nation and the region sees as critical for its unity, can then be achieved. We had economic and finance experts who showed that not just is credit policy an important rational approach, but it also makes economic sense. And as a matter of fact, it's credit policy that's allowed many of the developed nations to expand and allow their expansionist views to be properly funded. So what I want to point out is then that that our challenges with respect to the availability of flights in our region, with the ability of railroad projects across Africa, the availability of, say, Horace Campbell's focus on control over gold resources, and the ability to focus on, say, water projects that seek to reinvigorate the Chad Lake. All of these can be considered, but from the standpoints of making them national priorities and having the political will to make them national priorities, and then you create the funding for them. You set aside through credit policy the funding that's required to have these going. And so I think that change of political will with some of the old approaches to our economic strategies would be required and necessary to have us see this sort of infrastructural basis of our regional integration efforts.
Okay, I'm not going to say
Sister
much because
you can bring the curtain down.
Yes, I'm not going to say much because we really need to move on. But the idea of the diaspora was mentioned as the sixth region, and I do think that that we have to continue this conversation, which is very critical. But we really need to move on to our next section now, so I would stop there. Yes.
Thank you very much, and thanks to our special guests this evening, Atieno and Steve. Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you again sometime. So we move over to the next segment of the program, and we would once again welcome our guests, Sister Abeo Jackson and Brother David Abudallah. Welcome, and in this segment, we are going to look at some worrying developments with respect to the establishment of military radar or radars. We know of one in the country, a radar that the Prime Minister of Grenada would have politically procrastinated on, so that the decision would not be given too early. But the Americans were anxious to have this thing up and going, and they found fertile ground in the politics of Trinidad. So, David, of course, we want to start with you. Tell us about that particular concern before we move on to the vigil. What is really what Trinidadians and the Caribbean people should be really worried about in terms of those developments?
Right, thanks, Dr. Fergus, and good evening to everyone. Very interesting your segments of Indaba this evening. I really just want to stick in before we lose the radio audience on Talk City to remind them that this Sunday at 4:30 in Woodford Square, we are having the Vigil for Peace 2. And people need not be concerned about state of emergency or anything like that. There's no restriction on public assembly or gatherings. And therefore, we need to take a stand. We the people must say that not in our name. There should be no military attack by the U.S. in our name. War in the region, not in our name. U.S. troops on radar in Trinidad and Tobago, not in our name. Extrajudicial killings, which is murder in the Caribbean Sea, not in our name. So I just wanted to put that in. Sunday afternoon, this Sunday, the 7th of December, Woodford Square, 4:30 p.m. So having said that, I'm sure Abeo will come back to that as well. The radar is very concerning for more than one reason. First of all, there's been, to put it very politely, a total absence of transparency by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. In fact, the narrative that they have provided to the country has changed from day to day. So the first narrative was by the Prime Minister that the large U.S. Military planes that came into Tobago were there to do some road repairs and to do some work on the runway or some work on the airport, unspecified. And then when she realized that people in Tobago were hearing these big planes coming in and seeing what was going on, she said, I know she also said at the start, oh, there are no U.S. troops here, they all left. Then she had to recant that and say, well, yes, there are U.S. troops that are here and they were installing a radar. And then she went, after that she said, well, I didn't say that at the start because, this was something that would, to announce that the radar was here would impact on our national security. Well, I mean, that's politely a Nancy story. I suppose if you're a Tobagonian, you remember Nelson's famous calypso about King Lear. So you can't locate something like a radar at the end of the runway or the airport in Tobago without Tobagonians knowing about it. I mean, there are people living in the area, people move about and so on. And she attacked the media for exposing it and for giving the narco traffickers an advantage. Well, that really was foolish. And then she said, well, it was really about using the radar to pick up boats that might be involved in trafficking and so on. And then I think today she came up with, on the news tonight, I heard another statement explaining that, then one minister, I think it was Minister Sturridge, said it was to pick up drones that were bringing in guns and drugs and so on. And then the Prime Minister came with another story about what it was for. So all of these flip-flops indicate, she said this was supposed to be a secret. All of these things indicate the fact that the people of Trinidad and Tobago have been not told the truth. A very interesting article in the Sunday Express by retired Lieutenant Commander Norman Dindial, and he was on several media programs in the last few days, including this morning, I think. He, just to indicate what his qualifications are, according to the report, he said that he was once the director of the country's National Coastal Surveillance Radar Center. So therefore he knows about radar systems, right? That's his specialty. And what he said is that the radar he said, first of all, the country does have a 360-degree radar system that was recently upgraded by spending some $50 million, provided by the Israelis. Now, I don't like Israel. We shouldn't be doing trade with Israel because of genocide, but the Israelis do have a lot of high technology. And he said that the country's, to quote the report, the country's current system is fully capable of detecting marine movement and is highly sophisticated. He said that the system allowed Trinidad and Tobago to see go-fast boats and vessels moving around the country, though it did not necessarily allow the country to perform interdictions without adequate Coast Guard resources to do so. So he identified the problem, not with the radar capacity of the country, but the absence of Coast Guard vessels and personnel and support and so on. Now, what he said is that this is most likely an AN/TPS-80G/ATOR system manufactured by Northrop Grumman. And this, according to the specs, is a long-range, high-performance pulse Doppler radar that can provide 360-degree air surveillance, air defense, and counter-fire, that is neutralizing enemy weapons, target acquisition. So this, he said, is about war. It's designed for war and not drug operations, because it could pick up missiles and jets, Air Force jets flying at Mach speeds and so on. So we have not been told the truth about this. And what my last point very quickly on this is that a U.S. military installation, because this is not Trinidad and Tobago's radar, right? This is a U.S. military radar installed on the land of Trinidad and Tobago, specifically at the A&R Robinson Airport in Tobago. Now, what this does is that if there was a military war breaking out between the United States and Venezuela, Venezuela could say that any U.S. military asset becomes a target for us, Venezuela, and therefore Venezuela would be quite within its right to send missiles or whatever to destroy that radar in Tobago, which could result in not only damage to the airport, newly built airport terminal, but also damage properties, will threaten lives, and so on, and also impact on the tourist industry in Tobago. Already the Hotel Association has said that bookings for Christmas going into Carnival there have been cancellations, and it's down maybe 30% already. So I will stop there. This has huge implications, quite apart from our international reputation, which we will come back to, hopefully, Dr. Fergus, but I know Abeo wants to jump in now.
Yes, indeed. We want to hear Abeo. The last time she was on the program addressing this issue, she did express some very strong views about national and Caribbean sovereignty. So, Abeo, how shocked were you when this truth came out? Because many people were suspicious that what we were hearing wasn't the truth. And how concerning is it for you, in addition to what David has said already?
Greetings, everybody, everyone who's locked on. I am a firm believer in when people show you who they are, you need to believe them. And this has been a pattern of behavior since this entire thing started. And in fact, long before, this has been a pattern of behavior since their manifestos at that point in time, they were a party canvassing for power. At that point in time, there were certain things that were popping up in their manifestos that should have signaled that we were in for trouble. The manifestos were a festival of red flags in terms of MAGA ideology deeply entrenched inside of it. So when they assumed office and we began to head down this particular road, I wasn't necessarily surprised, but at the same time, very, very concerned. What has been happening over the last week or so, particularly with this radar, is such a gross disrespect to a population, a gross disrespect in terms of our sovereignty. I was looking at your Africa report talking about the continent being recolonized as well in terms of US bases and commandeering pieces of people's airports. And I said, but the examples are all over the world, and yet we have continued to allow it. We allowed it. There's a certain sense of, and this is why the vigil on Sunday is so important. There has been a certain sense of paralysis, inertia, apathy, all of those things amongst our society. Fear, genuine fear in terms of being able to speak out. And the vigil really provides a safe space for that, a sense of community, where we get to look our administration straight in the face, the governing administration straight in the face, and say, not only just not on our watch, but you've been taking us for fools. Because what you have done is, in essence, offered Tobago as a sacrificial lamb. This is the radar that Grenada, and yes, you said it correctly, Prime Minister Dickon Mitchell would have taken a very long time to, in essence, say no. He kind of politics and danced the thing. But what Grenadian citizens did was have intense pushback. The intense pushback by his citizens, I think, played a huge role in the fact that he couldn't, at that point in time, outrightly say yes to that abomination of a radar being installed in the Maurice Bishop International Airport of all spaces. And because of the fact that I think we have been in a space of wanting to bury our heads in the sand and telling a lot of us who have been raising and waving the red flag and saying that something is radically wrong. Many people have been saying that we are, alarmist, that we are just miserable dissidents. She tried to dismiss the last vigil as being, just a minority of dissidents, and a dismal failure. But I think we are getting to the point now where it's very, very difficult for people to pretend that what is happening in our space is not happening. This is we are in new territory. This is history happening in real time. This is uncharted territory, and I understand why there are a lot of people who are probably feeling a lot of things. The psychological warfare is on 100 right about now. People are feeling a lot of things, and maybe they cannot necessarily language what they are feeling, but they know that something is radically wrong. And I want to emphasize the importance of gut feeling and instinct here. I was on a program earlier on today, and the host, and maybe unintentionally so, dismissed feeling and the dismissal of feeling and the dismissal of gut instinct, especially in times like these, especially for peoples like us and from where we have originated. Dismissing of feelings in a space and time like this is a very Western way of attacking instinct and attacking a sense of community. Because what we do is we try to claim that criticality is devoid of feeling. And I think it is very, very necessary for us to understand that criticality without feeling, without empathy, without instinct inside of there is not criticality at all. So there's a lot happening right about now, and I think the radar underlined. The radar was the icing on the cake, the cherry on top, in terms of the absolute quagmire that we have found ourselves in over the last couple of months.
Yes, over to you, Renee. Let's hear your views on this issue.
This is either for Mr. Abudallah or Abeo. Persons in Trinidad, because some persons have been stating or claiming that we are effectively being occupied by the U.S. And by the military and troops. And then I think when the story about the radar came out, the Prime Minister had to, admit that yes, there's a radar, but there's also an additional 100 U.S. Marines on the island of Tobago. Based on your own, research experience, would you also say that we are effectively being occupied by the U.S. at this moment, or you think that's a premature statement?
Well, I wouldn't say that we're occupied. They're occupying troops here in the sense that there are American troops in Tobago. That is certainly true. There are military assets. We know about the radar. We don't know what other military assets the Americans have located either in Trinidad or in Tobago. That we don't know. But what I certainly think we can say without a shadow of doubt is that our sovereignty has been compromised totally, because we are dancing to the tune of Washington, to the State Department and the Defense Department of the United States. I mean, let's take a specific thing that has arisen within the last few days. In the United States, the issue of the killing of people on the seas, the boat strikes, extrajudicial killings, which is murder, because you cannot summarily execute people. That now is receiving intense scrutiny by the U.S. Congress, both the House of Representatives and by the Senate, including by Republican senators and Republican congressmen who support Trump, right? But they're very concerned because what came out more recent, well, there have been concerns that have been growing. And there's also 70% or something like that of the American population does not want the U.S. to attack Venezuela. And every night in the news discussions, Trinidad and Tobago's name is dropped as part of what is going on. But more specifically and more recently, the first boat strike on the 2nd of September, the reporting has now come out, obviously a leak coming out of the Pentagon, that there wasn't simply one strike, there were two, because the first strike resulted in two people surviving
Yes.
the first boat strike. And that had not been exposed at all. And that the report coming out was that the order was given to kill them all, right? Now, the wording is interesting because the wording of the person who ordered kill them all, the Trinidad and Tobago Prime Minister came out that same day saying they should all be killed violently. The language is almost identical. And that now has been identified not only as murder, as extrajudicial killings, but that killing of those two survivors has been identified specifically as a war crime and contrary to the rules and regulations of the U.S. Defense Department itself, because you do not in warfare attack people who are wounded to kill them, and especially people who are survivors in the sea. That is a war crime. And so what has now happened is that we are complicit in that. We have become complicit in that. So we have conceded or ceded our sovereignty, and we are simply dancing to Washington's tune, which is why the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was here in Trinidad and Tobago, not to eat doubles. It wasn't a tourist visit. It was to do, as part of his responsibilities, a whole assessment of the preparations of the United States for the war against Venezuela. That's his work.
Before you continue, because I think a thought that has been playing in my head has been, what is the likelihood that this would be a second World War? Sorry, not a second World War, a second Cold War.
Well, I mean, I don't know if you describe it as a second Cold War. I mean, there are already real tensions between the United States and China on the one hand, the United States and Russia to some extent. The geopolitics is that the world has moved to a multipolar world, so the United States is not the sole hegemon. But in the context of Latin America and the Caribbean, the U.S. wants to remain the sole hegemon. It wants to get access to Venezuela's oil and minerals, gold and other rare earth minerals. I think Dr. Fergus referred to that in his opening remarks this evening. So I heard one commentator on U.S. media talk not about the Monroe Doctrine, but now the Dunn-Roe Doctrine. In other words, the doctrine according to Donald Trump, which is Monroe Doctrine on steroids. So it is about geopolitics, very clearly, and trying to push back against left and progressive governments that have emerged. So, for example, Trump openly told the Hondurans who went to the polls on Sunday, he openly told them who they must vote for, and if they don't vote for this man, he will impose economic penalties against Honduras. What is that? That's gunboat and economic piracy and diplomacy gone mad. So there's clearly an agenda that is afoot, and we must understand it in that geopolitical context. And incidentally, Trump gave a pardon. So this is not about his fight against narco-traffickers, so-called, because he pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was convicted in the U.S. courts of trafficking 400 and more tons of cocaine into the United States, and he pardoned him. And he pardoned another guy who has some cryptocurrency business, who was a known exporter of fentanyl into the United States. And those guys got pardoned. So it's not about a war on drugs whatsoever.
I think what makes this even more complicated for a lot of our citizens here in Trinidad and Tobago who have been in a space of the very polarized tribal politics, caught in that trap for so very long, is being able to widen their scope of understanding in terms of what is happening in Trinidad and Tobago right about now and how it intersects with the wider world. And the fact that you still have a prime minister who is very, very willing to play to that particular audience when she posts on X about, anybody who dissents or anybody who expresses, and she explicitly says anti-American sentiments. That's where we've gotten to. Anti-American sentiments, then it must mean that you are colluding with drug dealers, or it must mean you're a part or of or affiliated to the opposing political party, who incidentally, she pulled the pedophilia card, which is straight out of the Trump playbook. Like, I don't understand it's not that I don't understand, I do understand. But it is frustrating. Somebody referred to it as a death cult earlier on this week. And the problem of being in a cult is that you can't see that you're putting yourself in danger, much less your community. You can't see it. You've almost already sacrificed yourself to believe in the insanity of what is happening around you inside of this death machine, this death cult. So as a result, because we've been inside of this very polarized space for so long, and many of us cannot think outside of that particular framework, we cannot see what is coming to us because we don't have the eyes to see it and the ears to hear. I just posted a clip from Rachel Maddow, who was on Stephen Colbert, who was talking about the Five Eyes, which is the 5 countries, the mega countries who share intelligence, of which the UK and America are part. I think Canada is also a part. And the reason why Canada sticks out, it's because it's not only the UK who pulled out of that particular intelligence sharing organization. Canada also pulled out. You know how egregious your actions have to be in terms of disregarding international law and perpetrating war crime for the UK, one America's closest ally for the longest time, to pull out of that agreement, as well as Canada. Are we going to position that as Rachel Maddow being a paid PNM crony? Because that's how we're still trying to position it here in Trinidad and Tobago. Like, make it make sense. You know what I mean? And that speaks to people like Roger Alexander, who came out, was it last week or week before, talking about wanting to monitor the kind of access that people have to foreign social media influencers or news outlets, trying to position the actual facts coming out as fake news. So when you go onto a program and you explain what Brother D just explained in terms of what the radar is actually for, what it is capable of, what its range is, especially in relation to where Venezuela sits to us, the situation that is happening with us and Venezuela right about now, which obviously means that the positionality of that radar can be termed an act of aggression. You have people saying that the fact is trying to frame what has been purported in news. And this is where sometimes I want to encourage our brethren and sisters within the media. There are some who have been going above and beyond, but we cannot just be okay with regurgitating rhetoric that don't make sense and not challenging it. Because there are people who are accepting what is coming to them through traditional forms of media, in particular, talk radio, newscasts, etc., on our traditional type media platforms. They're taking it as fact. They're taking it as fact. So when the actual facts are being presented, again, because of the fact that they are wrapped up inside of this kind of cult mentality, there's a dissonance where they are unable to receive it, and that is the danger. That is the danger that we are in, because we cannot wait for some caped crusader to come in and save us at this point. There's no, that whole doctor politics that we've been into for a very, very long time, as coined by Lloyd Best, where we wait for this one, crusading, debonair personality to swoop in and save us. That's not happening. That era is over. This is the era of community. This is the era where we have to band together. We have to understand the power in numbers, which brings me back again to why the vigil is so important in terms of being another timestamp and another marker, another signpost in the creation and the building, the steady building of a movement. We have to do this for ourselves together.
Okay, we are drawing close to the end of the program, but I want to project a concern that I have that is not particularly Trinidad and Tobago, but Caribbean. As you're aware, perhaps, St. Vincent just had elections. Prime Minister Gonzalez lost after 24 years as Prime Minister. The incoming Prime Minister, he has already been sworn in, is known to be pro-American. Now, it is highly possible that we could have an American ally in St. Vincent. If he is co-opted in a covert way, as we have in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, that could have immense implications for the unity of Caricom. Caricom has been wounded, but it has survived. And if St. Vincent falls to the lure of whatever America is offering, I think that could be really, really tragic for Caricom. So I want you to put in the context of the vigil, the concerns of a possible other ally in St. Vincent, and whether, let's say, live streaming of the vigil might be a necessity at this time for the wider Caribbean and not just a Trinidad and Tobago thing, in other words. That, if you live stream and promote live streaming, and perhaps like the Ibrahim Traore protest, which, had been a Caribbean thing in addition to being global, whether something like that would send a stronger message than Trinidad and Tobago having a vigil. Is there any plan, let's say, even if it is not for now, but for vigil perhaps 3.0, that there should be a connection across the Caribbean through live streaming so that people can interconnect and feel that vibe that Abeo is talking about? That sensitivity, that psyche that is being affected and people cannot express or know how to express it. Perhaps that is one way to go. Could you comment and give your closing comments at the same time?
All right, Abeo, you go ahead first.
No, I was just going to let Dr. Fergus know that we live streamed the last time and we are live streaming again. And that has been a responsibility that has been taken on by the Trinbago for Palestine group. They got it done, and it was beautifully live streamed. We had one angle. I think this time around they're going to try two.
No, okay. What I mean is this, but not just to me. Now, I'm not too savvy with the technology, language, and so on, IT language. But you could be live streaming, like, let's say, a funeral, and you're just projecting something out there. What I'm talking about is like inter-streaming, if that is such a concept or something, so that you have these networks of streaming going on at the same time. Something like that I'm talking about. Not just, like out streaming, but inter-streaming, if there is such a concept. That is the kind of thing I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I should say that we also live streamed on the MSA Facebook page too, so it was live streamed on two platforms. But one of the things that we want to say to people, I want to repeat this, is that don't stay at home, Trinidadians. Come to the vigil. Some people have gotten very comfortable and say, well, I don't have to come out, I will watch it, and that is my contribution. We need to see people in Woodford Square on Sunday. You need to show yourself. Don't be afraid of showing yourself and coming out physically. That's I want to deal with that. Because, sometimes you promote, live stream and then people don't show up. So we need people to show up. It's very, very important that people show up on Sunday. Now, coming back to your other aspect of what you said, Dr. Fergus, there have been some proposals, and we were talking about this, Sister Zakiya and Abeo and myself, some time ago, that some other people want to do a conference, a regional conference, and they wanted to do it in December, but we didn't think we didn't have the time to do that. And so that is something that will happen sometime in the new year, early in the new year. Unless, of course, there is some military action, God forbid, between now and then, in which case we really have to do something very dramatic and not simply have people interacting online. People will have to be called out in every Caribbean country to physically demonstrate their opposition to any military action that could take place. So yes, what you're proposing is one of the considerations going forward. I just want to say, I want to quote one person who is reported in the Express of Saturday, and this is one of a junior minister in the Ministry of Housing. He said the coalition of interest, meaning Trinidad and Tobago coalition of interest, the yellow is a code, would win in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, Antigua and Barbuda, and so on. In other words, there clearly is a move. But on Monday's election in St. Lucia, the yellow of Chastenay, he alone won his seat. So that the St. Lucia Labour Party, which party is a member of the Sao Paulo Forum, together with the MSA, we're the only two English-speaking parties in the Caribbean, has a very clear position that the Caribbean should be a zone of peace. And St. Lucia is a member of ALBA TCP, and so we're very happy that the St. Lucia Labour Party won in Monday's election and will stand firm on the principles of Caricom integration and unity, and that the Caribbean should be a zone of peace. So I just wanted to make that point in relation to the issue of what you raised about St. Vincent.
I'm scrolling here trying to find it because something very concerning is happening where that at this point interference in a lot of ways at this point, and it's internal interference within the Caribbean community, unfortunately, which is especially heinous. But of course, it's also outside interference. And it's me saying that Caricom, it feels like Caricom is under attack in terms of the North understanding how powerful Caricom could actually be if we truly were to unite as a bloc. We would become one of the most powerful blocs outside of the African continent if we were truly to unite. And I think they see it as imperative to infiltrate and make sure that there is an irreparable fracture, a fracture that will take generations to repair. And I'm saying that because to have Ralph Gonsalves lose the election, okay, he lost, fine. His people decided that they wanted a new mandate, okay, that's fine. But to see Trinidadian operatives inside of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, parroting yellow is the code, issuing what feels like veiled threats to Ralph Gonsalves after the fact. You, a brand new politician who, as the old people say, just wash your foot, jump in and now come to speak and throw words. I was trying to find the post, and I'm going to call his name because he's been everywhere, Macamillion. He's a young man that I went to school with. To disrespect Ralph Gonsalves the way he has disrespected Ralph Gonsalves on social media. A man who has, he is many things. He is many things. But a man who has contributed to the landscape, the political, social, and cultural landscape of our Caribbean community for more than 2 decades. It is mind-boggling that we have come to a place where we've given that kind of behavior street cred. To see our operatives in a space outside of Trinidad and Tobago, parroting Trinidad and Tobago propaganda about yellow is the code and trying to frame it as anything else but interference is truly, it truly tells us where we are right about now. And I need us to not have the conversation in silos. The interference by us in other Caribbean countries, elections, the militarization and encroachment that is happening here in Trinidad and Tobago, what is happening in Washington, everything is connected. And we need to begin to be able to start to connect the dots. We're not doing a particularly good job of connecting the dots. And I shudder to think what happens next, because I know Barbados has an upcoming election as well.
Yes. Okay. So, David, I give you the last word for this evening. Tell us again about the vigil, not in our name. Tell us how people can perhaps, kind of elaborate and in a sense emphasize that message, how, through what means and so on, in addition to coming there, placards and so on, to come with your placards and all that. So tell us again, time, place, how do you get there, and time and all of that. Yeah, and we close the program for this evening.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dr. Fergus. Yeah, so Sunday, this coming Sunday, 7th of December, 4:30 p.m. We've brought the time forward a little bit because it's getting darker earlier than it was a month ago. So we start at 4:30 p.m. Woodford Square. We have permission for the use of Woodford Square, paid for it yesterday, and so on. We also have informed the Commissioner of Police about the meeting. All we have to do is provide him, inform him. And we have done so. I've received acknowledgement of our informing the Commissioner of Police from his office. I dropped the hard copy, but also emailed it to him and so on. So all of those things have been taken care of. It's, as Abeo said, it's a very safe space. Parking is a Sunday afternoon, so there's parking around the square. The program is going to be dynamic and diverse as usual. And there'll be lots of surprises, if you wish, in terms of the cultural expressions of our people and how we are affirming our identity, our sovereignty, and our desire for peace. Lots of very interesting cultural things are going to happen. So yes, you're going to have some religious prayers and reflections. We must start off with that. And we'll have some short statements. We're going to particularly focus on some young people who will be making statements. And a number of them have already committed, and a few more we will be getting. So youth voices, not necessarily, the elders like myself will be featured. We want young people to speak, and the cultural presentations to convey powerful messages. So come out. If you want to bring placards, bring your placards, and so on. And just physically show up, because it's important that people show up and take a stand and say what is happening, not in our name. We want peace, because nobody wins a war.
Nobody wins a war. Nobody. Thank you so much, both of you. Thank you for coming on the program and for your concerns for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago and for the Caribbean. We also want to say thanks to our previous guests talking about ideas. Next week, I believe, and Renee can confirm, next week may be our last program for the year. So please join us for our final program. We want to go out with a bang, have a great program to go out with a bang, to take our break, our end of the year break. And of course, we hope to see you next week and next year when we return. Thank you very much, brother and sister. Thank you so much, Renee. And could you confirm, Renee? I said something. I hope I didn't say the wrong thing. Could you confirm?
No, you did not.
Give it to you to close the program. And close the program.
Next week is our last program for 2025. We'll be back out very early in January. So please join us next week. We are actually hoping to have the winners from our National African History Quiz and Spoken Word competition join us on the program, speak about their experience. And we are also hoping to get a representative from the UE Center for Reparations Research to talk about the upcoming reparations debate competition. And it's pretty interesting because it's a regional competition. I enjoyed it last year. We had some participants from Trinidad and Tobago. So please join us next week. And like Dr. Fergus would have said, Abeo, Mr. Abudallah, thank you for joining us today. I will be there on Sunday with my very young son, so I hope it's kid-friendly, child-friendly. And yes, and I want to encourage everyone to also come out and to please sign the petition. The petition is still open for signatures. Yeah, so please, please, please sign the petition. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and good night. Thanks to our listeners on 91.1 for staying all the way with us this evening. Thank you. See you next week. Good night.